Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. And as you can see on the screen, we have show favorite Tony Shaffer, host of The Hard Truth, and just all around great guy and probably still a spy, and we just don't know it. Welcome to the show. Back, Tony.
It's like the mafia. It's not like we can either retire or join. It's like, Danny, have you ever seen your audience probably knows what I'm talking about. Have you ever seen the series The Prisoner?
I haven't actually.
You need to see it. You need to see it. It's from the 60s. And Patrick McGowan, Danger Man, although he's not really Danger Man. Yeah, he's Danger Man. Anyway, John Drake. I highly recommend you check it out. It's a metaphor, but man, there's a lot of truth in that metaphor. Just saying.
Well, I'll have to check it out. I'm intrigued already, but
your audience probably already knows what I'm talking about. So
yeah, they're probably rolling their eyes like, how do you not know that? So
be seeing you.
Well, speaking of danger, man, we actually have some things to discuss today, which we have a man who's kind of dangerous, maybe in a different direction, in a different way, but no less concerning. Yesterday, President Biden spoke to a couple of different topics. One was aid for Israel in their war with Hamas, and one was aid for Ukraine in their war with Russia. Now, those are two very separate things, but there was one interesting thread that seemed to go between the two. And I'm going to show you a few clips here and see if you can detect the similarity. First of all, we'll start with Israel.
President Biden's off-camera remarks to Democratic donors in Washington today are the latest sign of increasing U.S. concern about Israel's bombing campaign in Gaza, which has killed thousands of Palestinian civilians. Bibi's got a tough decision to make, the president said of Israel's prime minister. This is the most conservative government in Israel's history, said Mr. Biden, adding that the Netanyahu-led coalition doesn't want a two-state solution.
So you have a couple of things going on this particular point here where Biden has been saying, hey, you're killing too many civilians. You're going to have to back off. You're going to have to do something different. Yeah. Israel has just said, yeah, pound sand. Then he's saying, hey, we want a two-state solution after this. So because we got a lot of, Arab folks in the electorate. And so we need to take care of them too. So you have to do a two-state solution. And here's what Netanyahu is saying in response.
Earlier today, Netanyahu said Israel enjoys U.S. support for its goal of destroying Hamas, while he acknowledged differing views about a plan for after the war.
Yes, there are disputes about the day after Hamas, and I hope we will reach an agreement here as well. I will not allow that after the great sacrifice of our citizens and fighters, we bring into Gaza those who teach terrorism, support terrorism, finance terrorism.
Now, here's what Biden said kind of in response to that yesterday afternoon.
Well, I have had conversations with Bibi Netanyahu, and I want to make sure that we don't forget what we're doing here. We have to support Israel because they're an independent nation. With regard to the flooding of the tunnels, there is assertions being made that there's quite sure there are no hostages in any of these tunnels, but I don't know that for a fact. I do know that, though, every civilian death is an absolute tragedy, and Israel stated its intent, as I said, to match its words with its intent with actions. That's what I was talking about today.
Now, okay, we're going to push pause on this for just a second here because that was one of the more stirring speeches in presidential history. Reminds me of this one from the past.
If you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate.
You see, you can hardly tell the difference between the two. They're so stirring. And wow, you got one where this is what a real president does when he shows leadership and causes the other guy his adversary to bend to our will. And then you got this one who's almost fallen asleep on the podium.
Well, Danny, there you go again. I don't know why you said that.
Wow,
I don't know.
Really good, man.
So anyway, I worked. The Reagan guys, all friends and mentors. I still see Ed Meese on occasion. So anyway, no, it's the difference in demeanor and content is striking. Nobody believes Joe Biden. I get this question earlier today on a different on a radio interview. It's like, what do you make of the current trajectory? It's like the current trajectory is failure. Ever since the Afghan withdrawal, Danny, nobody buys anything Biden says. And by the way, I think most people who study the reason for the Afghan withdrawal, the way they did it, that is Biden, is they thought they were going to get brownie points domestically. It's like, oh, we're just going to abandon Afghanistan because it's going to make us look good domestically. Huge backfire. It just speaks to the utter incompetence and inability of the Biden administration, he and his folks, to read the room. They can't read the room. They have no idea how to interpret things. And I think that the Israeli thing, think about this. Think about this. We must sacrifice everything to include our firstborn to make sure we help Zelensky and Ukraine win. But Israel, no. You've got to stop and back off now. You've got it's 11 o'clock. You've got till 6 o'clock to get it done. Think about it. Think about the contrast in messaging. And I'm not here to judge either conflict. My job as an intelligence officer is to basically kind of reflect as best I can based on facts what I think is about to happen. And so what's about to happen is the Israelis, because they've ignored Biden, they've been bold and innovative in their approach to doing things. They basically keep their word. They don't tell. By the way, they're not leaking anything. I haven't heard a single leak about what the Israelis are going to do ahead of time. It's like, we're going to do something and it's coming. And then they do it. It's like, oh, it's done. Ukraine, my God, it's like you've got drama within drama. You got Zelensky, you got Sirsky, right. You got Zelensky, you got Biden, and it's like Peyton Place meets Hogan's Heroes.
Yeah, and then
it really it's
Arestowicz inside there, and then Klitschko in Kiev. Yeah. Man, it's a mess. Yeah. And speaking of mess, that because I said there was two common threads. So that was the one thread you see running through the aid for Israel. We may say something, but we don't have any influence. And basically, they're taking our money. It was interesting the way that Netanyahu said it, because he's like, yeah, we like your money, but we don't care what you're saying. And we're going to do whatever we want. So we have no influence on that one. Then you have on the other one, well, I'll just show you this. Here's what Kirby said in September.
We all want to see this war end, but it's got to end on terms that President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people can accept. We want to help them succeed on the battlefield so that if and when President Zelensky, and only President Zelensky, can determine when it's time to sit down with President Putin.
Wow, that just really stood out to me that, hey, we're just going to give cash, and we don't have any say-so in what's going to happen here. So whenever Zelensky decides, that's what we're going to do. Now then people are starting to go, hang on, that was in September. There was still some fiction that maybe the offensive would work. Now then that fiction is completely gone for all the reasons you just mentioned, and some we're going to get into in a second.
Right.
But so now we got to come up with a new one. Now here's what Kirby said yesterday.
If Mr. Putin gets his way, he hasn't changed his mind. He still wants to take Ukraine and wipe it off the map. That puts him right up against the eastern flank of NATO. And who's to say that he won't make a move on a NATO nation? He's already threatened some NATO nations with aggressive rhetoric. It's entirely possible that we could then be involved in a larger war in the European continent, with American troops having to be involved because of our Article 5 commitments to defend our NATO allies. That's how serious this can get.
Oh my God, it's World War III. Ukraine is defending democracy, which Zelensky also said here. But I think it was 2 days ago, a really good analyst I've seen on television said this.
We said for over a year now that Ukrainians just wouldn't win. They're not going to win. It's not in the numbers. And I said early in the invasion that the Ukrainians would never be able to stop the ultimate momentum of Russia, no matter how you want to label the Russian effort. I'm not here to judge. I'm simply here to analyze. That there's no way that they're going to prevail. And yet you had this overly optimistic, almost magical thinking in every politician in the West. And I think they did it on purpose. I think they just wanted to use Ukraine to wear down the Russians, thinking that somehow that would create sufficient political instability in Moscow to throw Putin out.
And almost as if on cue, here is the chief magical thinking guru.
Ukraine has not failed. I think we in the West have failed. We failed to commit strategically to Ukraine winning. and therefore we have failed to deliver those capabilities that Ukraine needs and has expected. But also just the psychological aspect. We have not said we want Ukraine to win.
I mean, yeah, we didn't. It was all our fault. We just didn't give them the stuff. Otherwise, definitely they would be in Crimea. This is the same guy that said in August, no, I'm sorry, July, that Ukraine would have Crimea by the end of August, like this
Right.
past August.
Magical thinking. Magical thinking.
Man, what do you do with that? And why, Tony, do we need to give all of our money with no strings attached to all these places? And as the Republicans are being bashed a lot, but you know, it's hard to argue with some of their points that, hey, we went over 100 and something billion so far after 22 months. What's another 60 billion going to do that this one didn't do? And oh, by the way, what about our southern border? Can we get that squared away before we keep throwing money forever to the other side? And I'll add this point in here that's also just as troubling, is that even though they're asking for all this money, at no point do I hear, what is your objective? What is the strategy that this money is going to go towards? What is the objective? What's the end state? If we give this money, it's going to create this, and it probably will have to give it for this many years or whatever. None of that. It's just get the bill signed, get the cash out the door, and and then that's it. There's no then.
Well, I think it's all about the money. Look at how they're messaging on this and how desperate they are. I mean, you know, last week we had SecDef Austin basically saying, if you don't give us the cash, we're going to send your kids to their death. That's what he said. He did. I mean, let's not even pretend that he was trying to put a fine edge on it. And John Kirby, you know, I know John, and John should be ashamed of himself, because I'm sorry, there's already Russia bumping up against NATO. As I recall, the Baltic Sea nations, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, they're all part of NATO, and they bump up against Russia. And you know, the world didn't end, John. Sorry. And then Poland. I think Poland's up against the Russians too. So this whole fiction that, oh, there's going to, no. I think Putin, for better or for worse, has said, we want what we want, and they want the Donbass and the other areas we're talking about relating to the four oblasts of Ukraine. And in the process now, I think he's going to feel obligated to do something about Ukraine. Like, I don't think he wants all of Ukraine. I just don't. I don't see anything in their doctrine. I do believe they're going to go back on the offensive to cauterize everything east of the Dnieper. I think they're going to do that. But I don't think, and think about it this way, even with the completely ineffective strategy, Danny, today, with completely ham-handed, ineffective execution, using all the, and by the way, kudos to you. I listened to something yesterday where they were quoting you chapter and verse regarding some of the stuff you said relating to the weapon systems and so, you know, you're a big name, an effective name overseas, and bringing sanity to the discussion, especially in England. Anyway, you had gone through and talked about several of the weapon systems and how, you know, they didn't really do much. They didn't, but they did have the effect of actually at least fixing Russia, slowing down their ability to conduct. So okay, the Russians now have decided to potentially turn back on the offensive. They're not going to be able to do much more than what they're doing within the context of the troops they have. As much as they overwhelm Ukraine, they can't overwhelm all of NATO. So I think it's a fallacious argument. Oh, it's Ukraine or NATO. It's like, no, it's not. You know, Putin recognizes that, first off, his economy is recovered. It's overcome the sanctions. Yeah. So it's like, dude, I think he and the Russians are happy with what they have, and they will consolidate what they've done now. Will they continue to be aggressive? You know, they will continue to be aggressive if you don't actually do things that are practical relating to understanding what they want. When Reagan said what he did, Danny, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. It was backed up with diplomatic force and an ability to say this far, no further. Nobody believes Joe Biden is that. The biggest, the biggest problem, the biggest issue is weakness.
He also added, I think it's an important element. It's like, hey, Gorbachev, and here's how you can benefit from this too. This is going to be a win-win. We don't ever do that.
No,
we just want Russia to lose, and our side to win, and that's it. There's no, you know, mutual benefit. So there's no motivation for anybody to do anything aside from the issue you just pointed out about there's the image. There's no image of leadership that would make anyone listen to him anyway.
And by the way, Danny, what you and I are talking about here is not a secret. It's not a mystery. Dave Petraeus and Ben Hodges know exactly what we're saying to be true, and yet they're pretending otherwise. Either someone's paying them to think, to stipulate and say these things, which are completely magical thinking, or they're insane because there's zero indication, not a thing indicating that the Russians are increasing the ops tempo of forces outside the theater engaged in Kiev. Every indication is they're trying everything they can to recover and expand their petroleum industry and increase their ability to have a strong economy. That's what they're trying to do. And so it just befuddles me and frustrates me to see people like Petraeus and Hodges, who are supposed to be senior leaders who speak the truth, lying about what's going on. So,
and is it that they're lying, or is it that, I mean, I sometimes almost give them credit to say, well, they must be lying, because if they're not lying, then they believe what they're saying. And holy crap, if that's the people we got at the top, what does that tell you about our leadership?
It's one of the two. It can't be. It may be a little bit of both, but it's within that realm. And so, to that point, though, they would see us bog ourselves down in a war that is not ours. First off, I'm sorry, Ukraine is not Texas. Texas should be our focus. You know, I think you're from Texas, so Texas. Last time I checked, is part of the United States, right, Danny? They haven't broken away, right?
It was when I got up went to bed last night.
So, the Lone Star State still within our constellation. So that should be the focus of the Biden folks, and it's not. And then this other issue regarding the funding. You mentioned the funding. It's like, yeah, and Johnson, Speaker Johnson, God bless him, said yesterday, I've asked from the moment I became Speaker, I've asked for a strategy. What you talked about. He's like, I've asked for a strategy, and after Zelensky briefed and the administration briefed, we still don't have one, and I'm not giving him the money. That's the right answer. That is the absolute right answer.
Yeah, that's such a basic thing. It shouldn't even have to be said. What is your strategy? What is your end state? What will this money do? That's like A, B, and C, but it's infested, not even on the alphabet that's given up. It just give me the money. That's all he's asking.
There's a larger issue here that you and I should speak about separately, either on your show or my show. Not winning has become an acceptable outcome of our engagement in military conflict. Think about that. World War II. I do a lot of studies, and I'm watching a great podcast right now called The Unauthorized History of the Pacific War. Great thing done by Navy guys. It always talks about the strategy behind how we did things as a military. Plan Orange was the fundamental plan that was developed between 1930 and 1940. That was the plan that was used to defeat Japan in the Pacific. A plan, a strategy. We always had an outcome in mind, and how do we go from starting at the beginning of a conflict or decision to engage to a victory? How do you get there? We don't have that thinking now. Nobody right now is thinking, how do we actually go and talk to Congress about the 5 objectives we're going to achieve within the next 6 months, which then would lead to the ultimate objectives being achieved within 10 months, something like that. This is basic military planning you and I engaged in since lieutenants. This is fundamentally missing.
Yeah, we do need to have that conversation. That's a big one. And it, again, I remember, Tony, that literally was 101. That's like second lieutenant officer candidate school. Yes. I mean, that's what we're taught from the beginning. But what happened to it? It's gone.
Ever since Korea, and I fault Eisenhower partly for this. A draw or a non-victory is acceptable. And I love Eisenhower. Eisenhower did a lot of great things, but as any great president, he had flaws. One of them was leaving the Korean issue unresolved. So, and that it's unresolved to this day, by the way.
Right.
So
never did get fixed. But yeah, that's such a good point, that not winning is an acceptable outcome or even condition until it just festers long enough, and then you got a guy like Biden come along and just go, you know what, we're going to leave. See ya. Which, by the way, I said we should have been getting out of Afghanistan for many years, but holy crap, the way we did it was just abysmal. It was terrible.
You and I, we could probably have a show on, and we should. I think we should just do a show on Afghanistan, because I think you and I both, and I gave, you and I both spoke with Walter Jones, like, it's time to leave now. We had actually, this is not public, but it's not secret. Walter Jones and Jim McGovern had me ask Tony Zinni, General Zinni, to go over, and I think it was 2011, to do a survey, an assessment of Afghanistan. And Zinni's conclusion was, yeah, we should leave now, but it's going to take us 10 years because we have so much stuff. We've deployed half of North Dakota to Afghanistan. It's going to take us forever to get it out. But he said we should start then. And we kind of did. We started pulling stuff out, but it was never any cohesive plan. And the closest we came to a cohesive plan was the plan that Mike Pompeo put together for regarding the reintroduction of the Taliban into the political system and a government that was essentially both Taliban and the Afghan. And that was the plan. And that was the only solution that would have worked. But Biden decided, I'm not going to follow that path. And
right. Yeah, that's the other thing. We actually had Doug McGregor on. We talked about that because he was at the end of that. He was actually charged with actually making that happen and was thwarted for a number of reasons inside as well.
Right.
And I long said that if Biden had just said, we're going to roll with what the administration agreed to before then and getting out in order on May 31st of 2021, this would have been a radically different outcome because we would have been able to do it in order. And of course, I put a lot of the blame in that on the Pentagon, who intentionally thwarted what he was doing. But like you said, that's a separate conversation.
Yeah. But we should have the conversation because a lot of the underpinning philosophies that have permeated and I would argue sucked the effectiveness out of our military is stuck in the whole Afghanistan conundrum. So, but that's another story for another day.
Yeah. So jumping back to this story here.
Yeah.
So we have funding requests for Israel and we have funding requests for Ukraine here. Yeah. And as we just graphically pointed out, there's no end state or even strategy issued by the White House for either one of them. What then, Tony, given that forget what we should have done in the past or what we wish would have happened, but with the ugly, the hard truth that we have existing in both cases right now, what are American interests in, and what do you suggest that that the administration should do? And let's first start off with the Israel.
Well, one of the rare things I'll ever recommend is Congress do nothing. And in this case, I think Congress should do nothing. Go home. It's what is it, Wednesday right now? Go home. Take the holiday, leave. Don't write any more checks, period. The Israelis are going to be just fine without our check. Just saying. They're doing just fine. And I think they'll take it on faith that they'll get some support down the road. They always do. So, they're fine. As to Ukraine, don't write the check either because they don't know what they're doing. They've been listening to Victoria Nuland taking tactical advice from her. Just saying, man. And they're losing. So don't write them a check. Just don't do anything. Take a pause, take a deep breath, take a step back and figure out what is in the American interests for both cases.
And by the way, on that point, can I just add another thing that's been absent from the conversation, which I think should be injected into it? Why is only the United States supposed to be given this $60 billion?
Exactly.
Instead of the countries that are right next to it? How about you guys pony up? If you think that that's really needed, man, there's nobody stopping you from writing a check. Why don't we go there? Why does it have to be our tax dollars?
I know. It's like every time I hear these, this is a metaphor of like hearing Bill Gates or other. Oh, well, I don't know why people my age, my income don't want to pay more taxes. Nobody's stopping you from writing big checks to the government. Just saying. And same thing here. Go write if you really are that concerned about Ukraine, you go give him checks. But it's us. And because part of this, I'll be blunt, is kickbacks. Biden has already said, and his folks have been messaging, well, if we write this check for Ukraine, that benefits all of the states and all the members of Congress because of defense spending. And you and I both know that show. Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all these other arms manufacturers who do employ Americans. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that the reality is you're going, there you go.
Yeah.
Those are the guys. That's Gary. Where the money's really going to go.
There's your
look. Going to go to all these companies.
We're talking about a war here and funding, and look at all the smiles.
There
Everyone,
you go. That's right.
Like payday.
I'm getting that yacht for Christmas, honey.
Holy crap, man! Talk about bad.
I'm looking
imaging,
forward to that.
Open, not even
10 weeks in Bora Bora. Yeah. No, it's insane. So that's why the Ukraine thing is being pushed so readily. By the way, if money goes to the Israelis have their own defense industry. They may very well take that cash and just build stuff. Oh, that's not going to benefit American Congress members. So that's why they tied it together. They're trying to basically use Peter and Paul, not to rob each other or pay each other, but to leverage each other, because the big money goes to Ukraine.
What is our interest? What is our national interest right now? What should it be?
So, well, border, period. The border, because
I mean, specific. The border underneath, which I agree with.
Yeah.
By itself, we could also do a show just on that. Maybe we should do that as well. But what about in regard first to just Israel? What other than not write a check? What is our interest in that war? What should we
stay out of their way? Stay out of their way. I mean, this is where the U.S. tends. I want to be careful in how I phrase this, because I'm not an isolationist. I'm not one that believes we should sit back and be a witness to history and not participate. I'm saying that we have to make specific decisions on what will benefit the United States regarding relationships and functionality of strategy. And at this point, the Israelis have every right to defend themselves. There's not a sane person I know who has not looked at what happened on the 7th and said that's acceptable. The Israelis have every right to do what we did during 9/11. As a matter of fact, I think their right of going after Hamas is greater. And will Netanyahu seize and hold the territory? Probably. We would hold. We were in Afghanistan for 10 years. So okay, yeah. Would we do something different? No. So let them work that out. That is their issue. And the only problem here, Danny, is we continue to provide Hamas support through the UN. And it's like, okay, we're actually funding both sides of this. This is not a good idea. And we did the same thing in Afghanistan. We did the same thing. We paid off the Taliban to let us move things out of Herat into Bagram, into Kabul. Yeah, we are funding both sides of that war too. But we need to stop that. We need to stop this insanity of funding both sides. And then, so secondly, regarding our strategy then, what is in our interest? What are our specific strategic objectives? I wanted to do, you're going to laugh at this. I went to Joe Dunford with a guy named Jim Mattis. We were advising him. And I said, Joe, we need to do a grand strategy. This is back in 2015. Okay. And I love Joe Dunford. Don't take this as a criticism of Joe, because, I think he was the best general officer we've had in this for our generation. And he and Mattis both felt it was, quote unquote, too hard to do. How was it too hard to do a grand strategy? Everything we know economically and financially, everything is linked. Why don't we then actually examine the military and national security options of how to do the same thing as business does? Why don't we do that? Why is it so hard? And this is where you have to have people who are willing to examine the reality for what it is, not for what the political aspirations of the politicians are. And most people beyond the senior executive level or general officer level will not do that.
And it's just so frustrating because, again, we're always taught to do that. I mean, Command and General Staff College, I'm sure you went there, and several other schools as well. Even at the higher level, we're taught to link everything together. The DIME, the DIME, mentality, where you put all the economics, et cetera. And it's like, I don't know, they took the books away or something, or they don't read the books anymore. And it's just like, here's what we think we would like to have happen. So this is reality. That's just because we want it. It is. And then, of course, it's running into, a buzzsaw of the actual reality. And then it just, everything we try to do just ends up in disaster.
And this is infected. This isn't a Democrat or Republican thing, by the way, Danny. And I think you understand. It's like both sides do this. So, when I was a very young operative running Army's clandestine human intelligence program back in the 90s, we were running one of the top I was the operations officer of one of the top operations going on. It was actually briefed to President Clinton. I was in the outer room because you know how the CIA is. CIA doesn't like anybody taking credit for anything. So I was running number 4 of the top 5 operations on the planet. Jim Woolsey was briefing with Tony Lake, the top 5 ops to Bill Clinton. And I was in the outer room because if Bill actually had questions about number 4, it wasn't a CIA operation, it was an Army operation. And so I was there to actually provide details, because obviously it would be CIA briefers could not brief it. So I'm sitting there, and what was ironic was the intel take out of that operation had indicated that the North Koreans already had nuclear weapons, and yet the policy was to say the opposite, because it would not benefit the Clinton administration to admit, because they wanted to give the North Koreans all sorts of stuff to try to convince them to go a different direction. You can check this out. It was during the mid.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So the Clinton administration was trying to say, oh, no, we want to try to convince North Korea to not develop nuclear weapons. They knew they already had them.
They knew they already had them. Wow, never knew that.
So that's my point. That's my point, that all too often, and I love Jim Woolsey. Again, Jim and I are still friends to this day. But I'm just saying, and I think Jim would back me up on this. You as a senior intelligence officer, so often they will negate their need and oath of office to tell the truth, and actually sign aboard a political aspiration of political leaders on either side. This is true of the Bushes. This is true of Obama. And so this is where we have lost the bubble. We have senior military leaders, senior intelligence leaders who are willing to reinforce and support political aspirations of politicians rather than protect the interests of the American people.
Yeah, that's really the bottom line. That again, unfortunately, this is not even a right or left issue. I see it all too often on both sides of it, and that's really discouraging. So, Tony, the time we have left here, I don't want to let you go without asking you, given what we quoted you saying earlier on this show about the situation in Ukraine, and the fact that we want to give them 60 billion more. Now, whether the Republican Congress comes across with this or not, we'll have to wait and see. The Republican House, we'll see. But let's say that they come up with something, because I bet they don't just literally go to zero. I bet at some point they'll come across with something. What is this money going to do, and where do you think this war actually goes, no matter what anybody says or wants?
So I think I'd like to believe Congress is going to take the advice I just gave. Just go home. Just don't go drink some eggnog, take your size 10 shoes off and hang out next to the tree. Take a chill. So, but in January, it's all going to come back again. And I think there's going to be huge pressure because, John Kirby's going to be out and talking about how Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was shot down by Vladimir Putin and Christmas was ruined in Ukraine. I'm sure that's going to be one of the talking points. And the whole idea here is that we need to be just saying no until there's a specific strategy that will indicate, first off, where the money's going. And Jenny, I think we talked about this last show. I don't understand the benefit of funding the Ukrainian civil service or their playhouse in Kiev. I don't know how that money, which they're asking for in the supplemental, would actually do anything to help the war effort.
Yeah, that's actually, Tony, almost nobody ever actually talks about that a lot of this money is not going to bullets and bombs. No. It's going to just funding their normal bureaucracy. But that's a permanent condition, because the day you stop doing that, then their infrastructure falls. But that means you're signing up basically into perpetuity. And I don't know that the American people are ready to do that.
Oh, we've done it. We've done it in South Korea, and the South Koreans figured it out and got on their feet. So for every time we do it, there's always one time it actually works. But in this case, no, it's not our job. So the three things I would ask for if I were Mike Johnson, Speaker Johnson, these are the things I would do. First, I would ask for a specific accounting of all the money we've already spent. Where did it all go and what happened to it? And to your point, Danny, we've given them the M1s, we've done all this stuff. It's like, okay, where did it go? Just tell me how you used it. Just play it out. And if they can't account for it, then say we have a hard time writing the check.
That's a great first step.
So that's the first thing. Secondly, you've got to produce a plan of like, okay, if I give you this check, are you going to go buy fentanyl? Are you going to go buy drugs? Are you going to go fight somebody? What are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with this? And I want a strategy. I want to have Lloyd Austin in front of me laying out the 5 phases of the plan of how this is going to be used to achieve some level of, at this point, it ain't going to be victory. It's going to be maybe helping the Ukrainians establish an effective defense against Russia, because there's nothing left. Even if that money showed up in January, Danny, there's nothing they can do to stop the Russian onslaught, period. That's why I'm saying the Russians could take over the rest of Ukraine pretty easy. I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're going to examine and weigh their options, but I don't see them doing. But with that said, at this point, there's nothing the Ukrainians can do to stop the Russians. Their best option is negotiation. And that's my third point. I would actually put conditions on the
Yes.
money to say you need to open a dialogue with the Russians to try to figure out what common ground there is to prevent further bloodshed and conflict, because the neocons and the Biden folks have all used this bludgeon called the Ukrainian people against Russia, thinking that somehow that was going to destabilize the Russian government and throw Putin out, and it's shameful. So
Yeah, and all this nonsense that we showed Kirby saying yesterday about, oh my God, it's World War III if they don't win. No, it's not. Have a negotiated settlement so that it comes to an end. Putin has every incentive to come to some kind of negotiated settlement to stop his own war and to try to get his own economy back on a non-wartime footing into perpetuity. But he's always said from the beginning he just wants security on his borders in between him and NATO, and a rump Ukraine actually serves that purpose. But even aside from that, Tony, as I've said a million times, Putin doesn't have the capacity to roll into a 32-member alliance with Article 5 guarantees. No. He simply can't do it. So that's completely untrue, that threat that Kirby et al. Says.
You and I spent a lot of time studying the Fulda Gap, right, Danny?
Yeah.
Remember
absolutely.
the Cold War?
A lot of time on that gap.
So one of the notable features of the Fulda Gap was tank armies, large tank armies sitting within a day's march of Fulda Gap. There's no such thing now. There is no Guards tank army sitting just over the horizon that we have to worry about. As much as we have deployed 2 divisions to Poland as a deterrent, God bless them. I think it's an effective deterrent. Having armored divisions, you're an armor guy. You know, M1s are pretty cool, and they do a lot of destruction. So having you want to deploy, knock yourself out. Have fun over there in Poland. Poland's a great place to be, bud. So fine. But there's no indicator that you have Guards tank armies lining up on the other side of the border, getting ready to do a Fulda Gap scenario. There's no indication of that. And we would see it coming. There's no way you can move tank brigades around, tank divisions around, Danny, without seeing it coming a mile away. And so what John Kirby is saying is fundamentally false. So
yeah, absolutely. And that's a good place for us to leave off. Otherwise, we could go on for another hour and a half or so. Would love to have this. So we always look forward to having you back on because you have such great ideas. And I hope that Speaker Johnson will somehow get a copy of this episode here, hear those 3 points you had and say, you know what, we're going to apply those. Those are the most common sense, should be basic information necessary to do anything in here. And I'm afraid that it won't get done. But otherwise, I like your other option of just go home and start celebrating Christmas early and don't write a check.
Just stay away from the mistletoe, especially if the mistletoe is near Hunter Biden. Just saying. I don't think that's be careful.
Just for your own safety.
Just for your own safety. Just say no.
All right. Tony, the host of The Hard Truth, America Out Loud. Love that. So, yeah, you guys keep watching his show, and we look forward to being back on your show one of these days.
Well, thanks, Danny. It's always enjoyable. I really do enjoy our conversations. I mean, we get to actually talk about things we learned about in great detail and help your audience understand the context. So I always enjoy it. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, we will see you next time. And remember, we will remain unintimidated and uncompromised to bringing you the truth and the things that you need to make sense out of your world. We'll continue to do that. We'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.